Hi, this is Peter Teuscher. I'm here with Toby Demker. Thanks for joining us for another podcast where we pick a topic and see where the conversation takes us. We generally talk about personal development, professional development, organizations, and even a bit of philosophy. So thanks for joining us again. Hope you find this conversation interesting. So Toby, last time we talked about the stories that we tell ourselves, the stories that develop in organizations or in our lives and how that affects us. Did you have any afterthoughts on that conversation?
I did have a few actually. Yeah, I mean both personally, but also I had some discussions with my son about it. Not particularly about our the content of our podcast, but we discussed about a bit about diary writing and how you can how you choose the story to tell. I mean, when you write a diary, it's very easy to get into a pattern saying like, yeah, I today this and this happened, today this and it becomes very repetitive and kind of boring after a while.
Hmm.
And we had this discussion about, well, how can you can totally choose the stories that you want to tell, and you have an enormous power of choice here to focus on your emotions or certain events or your certain fact or how you're dealing with different stuff. And it became a really interesting turned into a really interesting discussion about what we choose to focus on and what we choose to describe and what do we want to put energy on. And it became really powerful and I mean an empowering conversation for both of us, I think. Just to think about that you can really today I want to focus on something beautiful I saw on the way home or something. You just write about that, and that's the story of the day.
Hmm.
Or it can be about certain facts, and it's just it. And I guess I talk a lot about that palette, or the different colors of the palette that you can choose from,
Hmm.
and by just thinking about the stories that you want to tell, it becomes so much more colorful and powerful because it's yeah, just staying away from that black and white, this and this happened, instead of, okay, what are our choices here? And just look at a much wider scope of things. And it was very powerful and energetic for both of us.
Wow,
So
that's
that's
great.
what.
How
Mm.
old is your son again?
He's 10.
Okay,
He's
okay,
turning 10. Yeah.
that's a good age.
Yeah.
Interesting, and yeah, that's great that you're having those kind of conversations. It's a good way to talk about. You can see things from different perspectives, right?
Mm.
And we before we started recording, we also talked about nuance, right, and how that
Mm.
important that can be in narratives. So, great, awesome.
Mm.
Cool. I don't have any kids, but I think one thing that I've done in the past is mentoring young people and as a basketball coach, and it's definitely something that I'd like to do again in the future. I think that's just such a powerful way to get to get people to get young people sort of give them a good start into the world to give them the power to perceive and look at the world and reflect and stuff like that. So
Mm.
awesome. Great.
Mm.
So you've picked a topic for us today.
Yes, today it was my turn to pick a topic, and I chose something that we might call cooperativeness. Perhaps there's another in Swedish. There's a word called medarbetarskap, which is usually translated into employeeship, I think.
Huh.
I
Okay.
see it more as cooperativeness, and we can dig into what that means.
Hmm.
But as a starting point, I guess I mean both you and I work with leadership development, and we all know that there's a lot of efforts and resources put into initiatives to develop leaders in organizations. And there's this thought about how important is this really? I mean, how can first of all, who are the leaders, how are they selected, etc., etc., but how can we focus more on the cooperativeness of the people who are not leaders and the importance of that for contemporary organizations.
Hmm.
We're talking about organizations now that are getting flatter. Everything is much faster. There's much more synergies in not only within organizations but also between organizations, and the importance of cooperativeness interdependence within the system, so to say. So everybody, I mean, we treat everybody as some kind of leader, stepping away from that traditional role that, okay, we have a hierarchy, and on the top of the pyramid we have a leader, usually a he, and we should listen to him in that sense. Right? Of course, I mean, we all know that we've gone quite far from that old structure
Yeah.
nowadays. But still, there's a lot of work to be done, and a lot of experiments that are being done, I think, and a lot of different kinds of initiatives to drive this cooperativeness and empower, the normal Joes on the floor, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about cooperation, obviously it goes well beyond organizations and companies and the workplace. Relationships are a perfect example, whether personal or romantic relationships or business relationships. There's cooperation there, and because your level, as you call it, of cooperativeness that does say a lot. When you look at the reason we have been successful as a species, most evolutionary biologists will point to the fact that it's our ability to cooperate with each other and find sort of communal solutions, or help each other to find solutions and overcome challenges. So I think and then in terms of how do you encourage more cooperation? I think that's a good point. And as you talk about within teams, obviously as companies become more agile, unfortunately, a lot of people think agile just means Scrum. That's only one tool, but or one model. But I think that you're right. A lot more businesses are getting flatter in their hierarchies, and so you need natural leadership that develops. But you also need how do you encourage cooperation or cooperativeness? I think is a good question. And I mean, imagine how do you get your kids to cooperate, right? I mean, that can be tough as well.
Oh yeah, I mean then we come into this whole or sort of adult development, getting into adult development stages, and yeah, that can be. And we just talked about being. I mean, you're a basketball coach. I'm a football coach, and to get kids to cooperate is not necessarily so easy. Um, but yeah, I mean, on the adult level, rationally, it's more easy to understand. But a lot of these patterns stay. I'm afraid so.
Yeah, I think within teams. So we're talking about sports within teams, but also within organizations, you have teams that often can foster a degree of cooperation under the right conditions. It can also, because a lot of times when people think of teams, they think of competition with other teams, right? In sports, obviously, you have competition. And sometimes people see cooperation and competition at odds with one another. But I think competition can foster a lot of cooperation within a certain group. I think the healthiest form of cooperation comes from when you are looking at how you can add value, right? And sort of meet those group goals or communal goals that you have.
Yeah.
But when you work with leadership, what kind of things what kind of issues come up that you have to try and solve in terms of cooperation?
Okay, yeah, so that's a good point to start. When If we think of let's say every time I discuss with anybody really, what does a high performing team look like? And there are certain elements that always come up, and it's about, and I think we've talked about this before perhaps as well, but it's something about the common goal. What does that look like? What are the roles in the team? What are the interdependencies? What is the mutual, the sense of mutual accountability or mutual responsibility for the goal, and stuff like this. And also, well, usually that's actually what comes up. You're talking within the team, as you say. We're if it's a sports team or a competitive team, that we're looking for finding ways to reach our target in the best ways. of course, think we also talked about this before, but there's also some ideas now that, yeah, maybe, high-performing teams are also really good at looking at how do you cooperate well with other systems or other teams. So widening that scope a little bit of, looking at the cross-functional collaboration and stuff like this. But so I think the traditional approach has always been, okay, so how do we develop leaders that they are able to develop high performing teams? Because there are certain things that you can do, and the focus have very much often been on that particular leader. And then, of course, maybe the leader helps to organize a team building event or something like that. But to really foster cooperativeness, if that's what we kind of want to call it today, in a team, it's takes a lot of effort for the leader to increase engagement, to increase motivation, to foster collaboration, etc., etc. And it's really about sort of giving power away. One other thing that is very typical in high performing teams that comes up, that leadership is very flexible or very agile. I mean, getting back to that term, so meaning that leadership is taken by the person where it suits the most for this particular task. So you might be really good at something, and so you take the lead on this, and that happens organically or naturally. But for that to happen, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done. You have to understand who's good at what kind of strengths do we have, what's the level of trust, etc. So I think this is really where this cooperativeness comes in. How do you empower your employees or your team members, the people in the organization, to be able to take that leadership, to make them feel motivated to step up, to feel that sense of engagement, committed to commitment, accountability, of course, is really, really important here. And then from a leadership point of view, what does the leader do to steer in that direction, or to manage in that direction, or to lead in that direction?
Yeah.
But it's very much about empowering and delegating and sort of giving out the power to the other people so that they can perform.
Yeah. Well, I find a lot of times, in order to look at how can you improve something, it's important to look at what stands in the way. So, sometimes you need to motivate people in order to be more cooperative. Sometimes you need to dangle a carrot or, give them a common goal. But what often stands in the way is, people feeling like they're in competition with another, or feeling like sometimes it's perspectives, and you see this within relationships, right? You see one person feels like they're always getting the short end of the stick, or they're always having to do this. Someone else has more benefits. I have more disadvantages. So I think it's dispelling some of the perceptions. And that's why I brought up the whole thing. How do you do that with your kids? And, it's like, well, how come? So, you have obviously age differences and different abilities and different things that you're allowed to do at different ages. So I'm sure that can come up. But I think within relationships, people fall into certain roles, and therefore they kind of develop these habits around the things they do and the things that someone else does, and then there may be this sense of, well, I'm always having to do this, or I'm having to do more, and so I think getting through that sense of inequality and recognizing that everybody has responsibility if you want to reach these goals, but also that recognizing who's got what strengths are most needed, which abilities, and then there's always the question of measurement as well. In sports, it's easy to measure because you have all these kind of things that you quantify. In basketball, there are tons of things that are measured. Everything from the points you score to there are defensive ratings, there are assists, there are rebounds, there are all these kind of things. And in soccer or football, you've probably got similar similar things that you can measure. But then how do you
Sure.
do that in a working team, or how would you measure that in a relationship? And in fact, is it even healthy to measure in a relationship, who's doing
Yeah.
more? But in order to foster cooperation, there needs to be the sense of everybody's making a contribution and everybody's got something to gain, I think is important. I've got a few ideas about this, and I want to come back to Stephen Covey. But what do you think of that?
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and that taps into. I know that both of us have been working with, the idea about self-directing teams or self-organization, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that really taps into this really well. I mean, but the big question is there, how do you do it? And what do you measure? I mean, we all know that in corporate large corporations, KPIs are kind of kings. Everybody's like, what are the KPIs? What are the targets that we need to hit? And that is the most important thing. Of course, you can divide them into different segments and different areas to have a sort of a wider scope of it. But the fact is that it's very, very crucial, and it's steering most of the activities that are being done. But so and that might still be valid, but who decides them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm thinking more about self-organization and self-directed teams and teams with a higher rate of cooperativeness, if we call it that again, there's a really honest and genuine discussion about, okay, as a group, what are the things that we should be focusing on, and how do we do that? So, and that's really a cooperation and an engaged conversation from each member in this unit, and they decide together. So, how are we going to reach these goals? What are we going to do? What are we going to focus on? Well, what if, as you say, so what if, how come she gets to do that and I don't? Can you have an honest conversation? It kind of needs a tremendous amount of maturity. I mean, my kids would not be be able to do that. That it wouldn't be fair to them.
Yeah,
So
you have all these.
it
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no. So it really takes a lot of maturity and trust, as we mentioned. So to get to that level, to have those honest discussions, and that doesn't happen per on just by itself.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of work to get there.
So I think some of the things that stand in the way there are, this. Some people have this sense of entitlement. Some people are looking at, well, what do I deserve? I deserve the same, or just again coming back to the sense of, are things equal? And so I think when you look at it. Let's go back to the whole competition thing, right? So, because you see that in the workplace, you see that in sports teams, you probably see that between kids. And I think the thing that I try and foster in teams I've managed and teams that I've coached, it's, if you get a sense of you're always in competition with yourself, first and foremost, right? Are you growing? Are you better than you were yesterday, right? So when you focus on that competition rather than this, well, I've got to outperform so-and-so in order to get ahead, right? Because what inevitably, a lot of people really buy into this game theoretic approach to life where, where cooperation is a give and take, but it's always got to be balanced. That the other person's got to be giving as much as me, otherwise I'm not going to, it's sometimes it's a means to an end rather than a way of living in order to make your community stronger, your organization stronger, your relationship stronger, right? So naturally, if one person's always contributing more, eventually resentment will build, right? But if you can, that's why it's important to foster it in everyone, not just in the few that are willing to. So I guess it's for some people it's a perspective on what does it mean to cooperate, and so maybe we can. That's the next step in the conversation is defining cooperativeness. What does it mean in all areas? Because for some people, cooperation means, well, I've got to compromise. We've got to find consensus. But often, consensus doesn't reach the most popular opinion is not always the right one,
Yeah.
and compromise, as trying to find the win-win is the way to be most successful, and
Mm.
compromise often leads to a lose-lose, right?
Mm.
So when you look at what does cooperation mean to you? How do you define cooperation or cooperativeness, as you put it?
Mm. All right. Well, one part of it is that that everybody has a say in how we make decisions, and of course in in what the decision is, but particularly is how do we take decisions. So for me, it's really about the okay. So I haven't thought of a sort of a scholar definition of it here, but it's something to do with how do you make sure that everybody in your organization, so depending on the scope of things, it would have different sizes, but so everybody in your organizations have the willingness and the engagement to make sure that we are working in the same direction and that we are flexible enough and take the mutual responsibility and accountability to reach our goals. And when I'm saying that, I realize, yeah, that okay, that sounds very much like what we're talking about when we're talking about high performing teams. Um, but so it's really about that cohesiveness and the glue in this group, that everybody's willing to step up to do more than their part. And that's really about the I think the mutual accountability where that comes in. That so if I see a problem, and it's not in my job description to fix it, I still feel like I need to bring this up. Maybe I don't have to fix it myself, but at least I have to bring up the discussion with other people. So that's really, it's so much about feedback. Can I give you feedback and have that honest kind of communication with the other people in my working environment? So that's really what it is to me.
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of things you can do to foster that.
Hmm.
Obviously, there's things like making sure roles, like within teams, it's making sure roles are clearly defined, so everybody knows what their contribution is,
Mm.
and knows how they're like. This goes back to the one of the whole, the pillars of motivation is having that sense of purpose, knowing that there is, recognize the contribution that you're making and the value that it has. So there's the roles piece of it, and always keeping focus on what the prize is. What are we all trying to work towards?
Mm.
I think those are important things. And then within the communication piece, you have people that can make valuable contributions, but they're more introverted, and making sure that when you're having those discussions, because a lot of times the people who are more extroverted, who are more outspoken, those are the ones that are being heard. So I
Mm.
think within a team dynamic, making sure that there's room for those people who need a little bit of time to gather their thoughts and have a
Yeah.
forum to be able to express themselves. And so when everybody has the opportunity to show what they have to contribute, then they're allowed to contribute more, and you can foster more cooperation between those people. So,
Mm.
and that goes outside of the workplace as well, right?
Mm.
But definitely within teams and within the workplace, I think if you can put some of those things in place, that can make a big difference.
Yeah. And saying that, I mean, it's really about co-creation as well.
I like
That
that
you,
word.
yeah, finding buzzwords here. No, but it that you triggered me with what you were saying, that everybody really feels like they have a part of things, and so it's more than just doing your stuff. It's like, okay, what are we building here? And that comes into visionary leadership. What does it that the leader is really able to describe in an inspiring way where we're going, and everybody has the same idea of what that looks like. Um, I guess I talk a lot about transformational leadership, and here, I mean, role modeling and visionary leadership are two of the biggest things, I guess. So for role modeling, to have a leader to create this kind of environment, you really need a leader that is perceived as honest, walking the talk, doing all of these things to showing that level of maturity and not being selfish at all, to be willing to delegate, not taking all the pride or the glory for the achievements that are hopefully getting along. So to giving away the glory and the prize sort of to the team members, but also that part of the visionary that can convey in a very clear way, where are we going, why is this important, what does it look like, how can everybody contribute, so that everybody has the same picture, but also that willingness and engagement to go there.
Yeah.
So for me, transformational leadership behaviors are really key to fostering this kind of engagement or cooperativeness.
Yeah, that's where I like, Seth Godin talks about, when he describes leadership, he said, leadership is about, saying, hey, you guys, here's where I want to go. Who's with me, right? It's about convincing people to all work together to get to a common goal. And rather than, because he talks about, you don't manage people, you manage things and situations, but you lead people, and that's all about creating that vision. And I think the most successful leaders that we have in organizations, they're visionaries. They can create or conjure a real clear vision about where we are trying to go, whether it's a short-term goal or a long-term goal. And I think that really brings people together when it becomes visceral, when it becomes this thing that I can totally imagine the outcome.
And also, what is important here, though, is that this leader is a good enough of a listener and a good enough of a communicator to allow for what I said before, co-creation or engagement in that vision. So it's not a one-way communication of, this is where we should go, I want you to follow me. It's much more about, well, so this is my idea of where we want to go. What does that look like to you? How can you contribute to that? So everybody has a real sense of, well, co-creation and participation, and I can and I want to really make an effort to reach these kind of goals and to reach this destination.
Yeah, I want to be part of this, and I agree. And then everybody interprets how they can realize that goal, or what it could look like from their perspective, and making that contribution, I think, is really important. So, going back to the whole, well, first of all, I had wanted to talk a little bit about game theory, right? So a lot of people refer to the prisoner's dilemma, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, but for those people who aren't, there's this there's this thought experiment where you have people who are arrested for doing a crime together, and they're kind of put in separate rooms, and they're given a choice where they could either cooperate or not cooperate, and if they both cooperate or they both stay they have this allegiance to each other, so they don't admit, neither of them admit to the crime, or both of them admit, or one admits and the other doesn't, has different consequences.
So you get much severe sentences if you don't cooperate, but you don't know if the other person's cooperating, right?
Yeah, if the other person gives you up, then you have the worst outcome. Whereas if neither people give each other up, then there's a lesser outcome. And if they both admit to the crime, and then there's kind of the middle of the road. And so people kind of translate this into life, and then you have sort of the social dilemma where all these trade-offs. So, it's based on this premise that we're all basically selfish. And I don't know that I agree with that. I think we have self-preservation, but I when I look at, I think it was really revealing to me when I was in Africa and went to a national park, and looking at the way, because people always talk about the survival of the fittest, survival of the strongest, and And yet what I saw from my perspective was an amazing amount of cooperation in nature. All these symbiotic relationships and these things that can't, it's a system, and things can't survive alone, right? And even the studies that have been done on the desertification of land, where they realize, well, you need cattle to graze, to till the soil, and to fertilize it and so on, and helps plant grows. It brings diversity of species and so on. So there's an immense amount of cooperation that we see in nature, and so this sense that everything is about this massive competition and dog eat dog, and so it's a lot about the mindset and the perspectives that we have, and so that's why. And this is where I want to go back to Stephen Covey, where he talks about these three stages of development, where we start life dependent, right, and then we look to graduate to independence. And a lot of people are always looking for that independence. What's in it for me? How can I succeed? How can I be the best? And then he talks about the sort of that third level is that interdependence, that recognizing that. None of us can do anything without the help of others. I mean, we can't be doing this. We could say this is a cooperation between you and I, but the without the internet provider, without the power company, without the houses we're both living in, I mean, everything has had a contribution from someone else. So there's just no getting away from it. So and even if you were to go live alone in nature, you have to cooperate with the elements of nature, with the animals around you, with everything. So there's never a pure independence from anything. You're always reliant on other things. And I think when you can start to look at life that way, you recognize that the more that I can make a positive contribution, the more that I can cooperate and achieve a better goal for. This is where people who are always looking at things in terms of, why should I pay my taxes or whatever, right? Something like that. The things that keep society running, the money, and you can debate about the politics around this. But if you, I remember moving from Canada to Germany, and the taxes are high here. Not as high as Sweden, but I really appreciate. I don't have any kids, but I really appreciate that there's good school systems, because that's going to bring really hopefully functional, well-educated people into the society, and so the society I'm living in is going to be better, right? So that's just one example, but all these things that we make small contributions to, and they're all. If we can foster a sense of, as you say, cooperativeness, and start to recognize that everything we contribute, if I don't always have to measure every contribution I make versus someone else's, rather, it's not about that competition. It's not about constant equality, because in the end, it'll all, I have this philosophy that it'll all come back to you, or it'll all work itself out. But just recognizing that, that if I have the ability to contribute more than someone else, that's great. That's probably a result of the consequences of my life, or the privileges I've had, or whatever. And then to be able to recognize that, even if I give a little more, it creates a better environment for me as well, right? So I think it's gaining perspective on why cooperation is important, what things to let go of in terms of that petty competition, and just focusing on the bigger kind of aspiration, or the bigger goal at hand. So, and I think back to your point of teams and organizations, it's getting people away from those, well, what's in it for me? And especially, the sports teams that work really well, they all kind of give up. I think in basketball, I find it's an overused term. Sacrifice is when I look at these multimillionaires talking about sacrifice, it's like, whoa, yeah, you really know about sacrifice, and maybe they do from maybe they grew up in poverty and were. And their talent brought them forward, but still, from that perspective, it's hard to for me, sacrifice, or mothers sacrifice a lot for their kids, or parents do, that those are bigger sacrifices. But anyway, it's just that sense that you're willing to give up something for the team or for the organization or for the people around you, for the community,
Yeah.
and just recognizing the benefits in that.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, thank you, because you really lift that to the macro level where it needs to be, maybe, and that's one of the parts where something that the leader well, how a leader can facilitate this process is by constantly like helping everybody to raise their views a little bit, to look, not only look at the tasks at hand, but look at the consequences for the group that we're working in, but for the community around. And I remember I was really puzzled before this was, I don't know, like 10, 15 years ago. I was doing a certification in something called the Leadership Circle, which I still think is a fantastic tool, by the way. But we're talking about creative leadership patterns and what are really effective leaders doing that are fostering people to, well, fostering effective leadership, really. And in one of the components there, or one of the behaviors were about community. And me and other coaches and coaches that were working together, they kind of struggled to understand, why is this important? What does this have to do with it? But more and more, maybe my maturity is increasing as well. More and more, I realized the importance of this. That we can't only focus on the the vision and the strategy and the goals and etc. for the organization or for the team, but it's really, what are the what does this mean for other people? I mean, if you look at the ecosystem around us, and it seems like if the leader is willing to invest some of his or her time in more community work, it has a really positive correlation with effective leadership. That people are willing to follow these kind of leaders that are active in the community and willing to do good voluntary work, helping out, doing other stuff, and also inspiring others to do that. So if more and more people well, again, are willing to participate in this kind of work, it has a great effect on cooperation and looking beyond the task and the little system that we're working in, but really taking an active role in other parts as well.
Yeah, and that's why I think the key for me is always encouraging people to look at, and I do this regularly, and even in myself, is how can I add value? Asking that question, how can I add value? And this is why I think it's great that there's this trend towards more purposeful work and purpose-driven organizations, but also in individuals wanting to have a more purpose-filled existence, but also a career and work life, and looking how can I contribute, right? Asking yourself first, and the famous quote from JFK, talking about ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. I think asking yourself, how can I add value? What's my contribution? Rather than looking at everybody else and making sure everybody's giving the same. It's really focusing, and naturally, you don't want, it's not good for cooperation or cooperativeness if someone's always riding on someone else's coattails, or there's one person in the group that kind of sits back while everybody else. So that does need to be addressed. But still, for the most part, if you've got the right chemistry in a team, or you've got the right dynamics in a group or a community or an organization, and this comes back to culture, then you can really foster the sense of, how can I add value? And this is something, I'm in the fortunate position that I can get paid well to do jobs that or projects and so on that maybe people are willing to pay for my expertise, but if I don't feel like I can add a lot of value, I will walk away from that, and I'll look for things where I feel I can add more value. And naturally I'm in a good position that I can financially do that, and I don't have to, I don't have to take every job that's offered to me. But I think it doesn't always have to be, the financial side of things. But if you can approach things with that mindset, where as many things as you can possibly do. Obviously, we all have to pay the bills, so I understand that. But within a workplace, for example, where you're on a salary, right, to always be looking at how can I add value, not how can I politically get myself ahead in this organization and taking this game theoretic approach to life, but really going, well, how can I make this organization better? What can be in sports sometimes they talk about legacy, but that's also very individualistic, right? But at least it fosters this sense of what can I contribute in some cases. So I think really steering people into this the contribution that we're making, that fosters a lot of cooperativeness and getting people away from the sense of competition in terms of I've got to get ahead and it's all about how much recognition I get or how much I'm getting paid, and all these kind of ego-driven things, rather than going, well, I feel really good about the job that I've done. I feel really good about the contribution I've made. I feel like I've really earned that bonus or that the salary I've earned, or I've really earned the recognition and praise. Like, think about it. I can. I know in sports or in work or whatever, if someone really compliments me on something, but I don't feel good about the work that I've done, or I know I took a shortcut or whatever, I have a hard time accepting that. I have a hard time feeling good about that. Whereas even if the results aren't where we hope they would be, if I know that it gave my all, like in teams, right, in sports teams, if you lose a game, but everybody tried their hardest, worked to their fullest potential, but they just came across a better competitor, you can feel really good about yourself. And I think that's the mindset that I like to encourage people to get to.
Yeah, sure. Also, I mean, a lot about that the language is about that, something that we were able to do together.
Yeah.
And from a leadership perspective, to putting that focus on the group and not on yourself. That's obviously really important.
Yeah.
Something else I was thinking about, I lost my track here, but maybe we'll come back. Sorry.
No problem. I think for me, I think those are the things that most stand in the way of trying to be cooperative. I think, and it's. I think it's important to recognize that this is a theme throughout life, right? And I know that it's we like to draw it into the kind of the organizational work we do with leaders and so on. But I really think if you can, like when you talked about at the beginning, working with your son about the stories to tell, but and then I asked you the question about how do you get your kids to cooperate. I think if we can teach people at a young age about the responsibilities we have, because with freedom comes responsibility, right? It's not these, I have rights, but rights are, man-made, they're conceptual. And so in order to maintain that, you need to also make a contribution. You need to take a certain level of responsibility. And I think that when people recognize that, the more positive they contribute into the world, into an organization, into a team, the better they will feel, right? It's its own reward, but also the better the outcome of the group or the society we get to live in, and so on. So I think when you brought up the topic, I thought that was the biggest message for me, was just recognizing that the more you add value at every level, whether it's in your organization, whether you're a leader or whether you're part of a team, whether you're part of a community. I was thinking actually about my neighbor here, and it was so interesting when there was a lovely pension couple that was pensioners that were living next to me, and unfortunately he passed away, and a few years later she decided to sell the house, and having a good neighbor is is really valuable, and
Yeah.
so I had considered actually buying the house, because it's a double house, so we
Like
have
a
we
semi-attached.
shared
Okay.
one semi-detached. We in Canada we call them duplexes, but here in there's different in the UK they call it something different, semi-detached, I
Mm.
think, and so obviously it's important to have a good neighbor. And the thing is, so I was thinking, well, then I would have control over who rents it or not. And in the end, I opted out. I thought financially it's a strain, and it's a lot of stress. And anyway, and then I just let it go. And then some really lovely family moved in,
Mm.
and and we have this great. There's never, if I ever need help with something, he's happy. It's never about I've got to give something back.
Mm.
When they go on vacation, I take care of the cat, and they always want to bring me something back. It's like, no, when I go away, you pick up my mail. What's the, I'm not
Mm.
worried about the immediate payoff, the immediate benefit. And I think
Yeah.
for me, that's there's so much value in having people like that around you,
Mm.
and so because I've also got some great friends that are always willing to help me out, and I feel bad about taking stuff because, like, well, I've got nothing to give in return, but they
Mm.
have this mindset that it'll all come back. I'm happy because of our friendship. I'm happy to make this contribution,
Mm.
and I think if we can adopt far more this sense of what can I contribute instead of what's the transaction here? What am
Yeah.
I going to get in return? What have
Mm.
if we can just get away from what I've got to get paid for the service, or apart from the fact that we all have to make a living, but what always looking at it as a transaction is not
Mm.
doesn't create cooperativeness, as you say.
Yeah.
It creates temporary and very limited cooperation
Mm.
when it's self-serving, and I
Mm.
think. Again, I know I'm repeating myself here, but it goes back to fostering that idea that, how can I add value? How can I contribute? If people can be constantly asking that idea, and if we can start people at a young age, at kids, asking,
Mm.
how can I make a contribution? Without being taken advantage of. That's the balance that you need to find.
Mm.
So yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to. I remember when you first brought up the topic. It's one of the things I thought about was my neighbor and how
Yeah. Interesting.
cooperative they are, and how willing to
Mm.
if he finds out about something going, he'll let me know, and we should talk about it, and how do we overcome this challenge or whatever. And I think that is just what a great way to live, right? What a
Mm.
great way to work. Like if you're working a work environment that is like that, think about
Mm.
the amount of creativity when everybody's encouraged to make that contribution, and recognizes the what they can contribute.
Mm.
That fosters so much
Yeah.
cooperativeness, as you say. So
And that's, I mean, now I remember a few things that I want to say. Uh,
through my
so
through
first
my
of all, I
monologue.
mean, no, but first of all, that you highlight the importance of transformational rather than transactional leadership there. So
Yep.
that's just ticking that box. But also the positive spin that your behaviors can have on others. Because if you see that, if your neighbors is behaving in that way, then yeah, I'm willing to do that. And it has a very sort of positive spin-off effect in your immediate environment.
Becomes
So
contagious. Yeah.
yeah, so and of course vice versa. If everybody's just looking after their own little uh, piece of the cake, and looking after their own KPIs or whatever, it's going to have the same negative spiraling effect. So really trying to, it's something that we really need to foster. And what is interesting, I think, if you're looking ahead and if you're looking at education now, um, I don't know what it looks like in other countries, but at least in Sweden, schools are focusing a lot on cooperation, to learning to cooperate, working in projects, we're working with all kinds of different students in the classes, different backgrounds, etc., and really learning the skills to cooperate. I read I think it was an IBM report about future jobs, and one of the key skills in the future workplace is to be able to cooperate. Because when you look at things, I mean, there's more and more. if we use this VUCA, everybody talks about
Oh yeah.
VUCA, but if we look at that kind of world, I mean, it's going to be very unclear exactly what has to happen, what needs to be done all the time. So it takes an enormous amount of individual accountability to, what do I see, how can I create value, as you said,
Mm-hmm.
what can I do here to help? And it's not necessarily so that somebody's going to come and tell you this is what you need to do. So you have to pick up pieces and find people to be able to collaborate with and cooperate with, and that takes skills. I mean, it takes a lot of self-awareness, a lot of communication skills, with project management skills, a lot of different things that needs to be practiced and taught and not being told what to do all the time, right? So this and this has to do a lot with cooperativeness, the sense of self-direction or autonomy. And I find it really interesting with these kind of people. If you look at large organizations, there are always a few individuals, and nobody really knows what they're doing. But they they've been in the organization for a really long time, and they can kind of do what they want because
Mm.
they're very important. But they're obviously creating value somehow.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's very often so that they see something that needs to be fixed, and they see something that is important. Think, okay, how can I create value? Maybe I need to start a project in this area, and they're usually very well connected in the organization, so their network is great, so they know where to pull resources. But that's a wonderful skill. And it looks like in the future it's going to be more that kind of work that needs to be done, people going and looking for how can I create value in this situation? What can I do here? Maybe putting a team together, but really using your influencing skills to make something happen and
Yeah.
make people cooperate into this direction.
Yeah, and helping others, bringing them up to your level, or helping others gain skills, or sharing your knowledge. So it's not that I'm going to hoard my knowledge so that you can't catch up to me. It's sharing your knowledge so that other people can make an equal contribution. And I think a lot of people think that within cooperation, in sports, there's no I in team. But in order to make the biggest possible contribution, you still have to work on your own skills, right? You still have to make sure that you are able to make the best possible contribution, right? So you're not just relying on the group. You're also help driving things forward. And I know I think the metaphor is used a lot, but I've been using it for well over 20 years with people, and I just used it last night with a friend. But the whole when you're in an airplane and they talk about to first put the oxygen mask, in the case of loss of cabin pressure, first put the mask on yourself and then help children and people around you. And I think for me that's a metaphor for, if you aren't making sure that you're in a position to make a good contribution, or like whether it's your health or your skill set or your mindset, if you're not making sure that or even being self-reflected enough and self-critical enough to go, here's where I need to change. If you're not at the best of your ability or working towards being the best, then you're not going to be a whole lot of good to other people. If you're sick if you're not taking care of your health and you're sick all the time, because you're sacrificing for other people, you're putting other people first all the time, your contribution's not, the level of, you may want to cooperate, but you may want to contribute, but you aren't able to, because you haven't learned the skills, or you haven't developed certain things about yourself, or you haven't taken good care of yourself in order to make the best contribution, whether it's mental health, right? I mean, we some people will put themselves in such and this is why burnout is such a problem. You'll take yourself to the limit and beyond, and then all of a sudden you're no good to anybody. You're no good to your team. You're no good to your family. My girlfriend had to, she took some time off because of the fact that she didn't put any barriers, and I hope she doesn't mind me talking about this, but it's just, and look, she's certainly not alone. A ton of, like, so many high achievers, so many people who are trying to be successful and trying to contribute as much as they possibly can, and then just go over their limits, past their limits. So if you're not taking care of yourself, you also can't make a good contribution. So that's part of cooperation, is not putting yourself beyond your ability to cope with situations. So I think that was an important point I still wanted to make.
Yeah, and that's, again, that for me, that brings us into psychological safety, which might be another topic for us, but also if we're thinking about, okay, so what can you do to create an environment where you can foster this kind of cooperation and cooperativeness, and psychological safety really comes into play, because in what kind of situation are you able or willing to say, I've too much to do, I can't do this, I need help, or I don't feel like I'm able to do this, I don't know if I have the skills to do this. What if I say that? What are people going to think about me? Am I not good enough? Or so to create an environment where you can have that level of honesty, transparency, and basically psychological safety, then to have these kind of conversations, that's also a real skill set that you, as a leader, that you can really sort of co-foster with your team.
Absolutely. When you look at Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions, the foundation is trust, right? Yeah. If you don't have trust, and the only way you build trust is if you feel safe, if you feel safe enough to have conflicts, if you feel safe enough to express a different opinion, have a debate, you have to feel safe to take some risks. If you can't, give your opinion, I've seen leaders who, including a CEO, that surrounded themselves with yes men, right? And if that's what you want, you're not creating. And there was an environment of fear. There was a really negative kind of culture that developed, where everybody just covered their back, and there wasn't a lot of cooperation, because it was all about I've got to make sure I'm safe, right? And so that's where leaders can certainly have a big role, and that's where you have to develop this level of trust in order to, as you say, have this psychological safety. To the point where everybody is willing to, express themselves, make a conversation, make a contribution, raise concerns. Like, sometimes people are afraid to put out an idea out there because they're afraid of it being, criticized. And sometimes you need these kind of controversial opinions in order to have the debate, in order to make sure that you're following the best course of action and so on. So sure. I think that's a good point. Making sure people, there's not this environment of fear that's another big hurdle or a roadblock to cooperation, right?
Yeah. So maybe we can identify a few obstacles for cooperativeness and some, good practices or best practices to kind of foster this. So I think what we've said is something about an over focus, that too much focus on KPIs, like really thinking about your target setting and objective setting, to not have it too narrow, too focused, that it really needs to have a wider scope of things. Too much structure, I think, can be a real problem for this kind of cooperation. How much not having enough autonomy and not delegating enough, these kind of things can really be obstacles. What else have we said?
Well, I think we talked about roles and expectations. I think when you make those clear, what contribution is expected of people, then it becomes easier for them to recognize how they're going to, what their role is in achieving a goal. I think changing the mindset, right, from this game theoretic, competition within a team, recognizing that you're only in competition with yourself rather than with other people, and really for me this getting away from this the I in team, where what am I going to get out of this? What is my benefit? and asking more about what contribution can I make. So it's really a paradigm shift, and getting people to look at it in terms of the contribution that I'm making rather than what I'm getting out of it at the end. Naturally, everybody wants to enjoy the benefits, right? And when people recognize that how much benefit there is in your group, your team, your organization, or your community being successful, that you will benefit more than if you are hoarding, selfish, and because those are all very short-term goals. So I think it's really the mindset, and is a really big piece of that. So
I totally agree. And to foster this, I mean, there are certain pragmatic things you can do. I mean, yes, community work that we talked about. I mean, most corporations have some kind of CSR, social or corporate social responsibility programs. Widening that scope, thinking about. What was I what was I just thinking about? Well, enabling people to participate in the vision. We talked a lot about this, engaging people in that vision. What are the things that we need to do? Have these kind of honest conversations, trying to foster that psychological safety, but really trying to foster honest conversations where you can increase the mutual understanding, but also the expectations that are set. Oh, doing kind of stakeholder interviews, thinking about, what do people expect from us? So we don't focus too narrowly. Really trying to widen that scope and look beyond how can we serve other teams, other clients, whatever it is, whoever your stakeholders are. But having these stakeholders interviews, that's important.
And I think we talked earlier about agility, and people get so wrapped up in their own what are the internal workings of a company, and they're very inward focused. And obviously agile is one where you're very customer focused, or you're very outward focused, and then you look for the resources internally to best achieve those those external requirements, right? So and then it forces a lot of cooperation. It encourages a lot of cooperation, right? And then natural leaders develop in those very flat, agile teams. People who in that situation are the best to lead. And I think it's definitely the way organizations need to go. And we'll see if we can move away from these old hierarchical structures. But
I think that, as you say, that I think that most organizations want to and are willing to go
they just don't know how.
in this direction.
Yeah.
But it's really difficult because how do you balance that loss of control, and how much autonomy can you give? What if we can't measure everything? What does the stock market say about that? There's a lot of investors that don't we want to have black and white figures on everything, and that can be an obstacle as well to look at these kind of things. So it's not easy for organizations to just go in that direction. There's a lot of efforts and a lot of energy trying to, actually being an obstacle or hindering that kind of development, I think.
Yeah, but a lot of our incentives are geared towards moving up the corporate ladder. You have a job title, you have increased pay. Everything is all about moving up within the hierarchy. So it's time to rethink incentives as well. And actually, that's another thing. Making sure your incentives are structured the right way in order to support cooperation, rather than I've worked in organizations in the past where there was a lot of silo thinking, because they were really, different departments were pitted against each other. They were in competition with each other, and it's like and this goes to when Dan Pink talks about how to his three pillars of motivation. And he said, previously he said if he wanted people to be creative, he would have given them some kind of a financial incentive, some kind of a creativity, or, coming up with the best idea, and really. And recognize that actually undermined the whole. They came up with worse solutions, right? And so recognizing
get out of the way.
Yeah. So our incentive structure is one, and that takes us back to the whole, because it creates this very transactional and individualistic. I've got to get ahead. Competition can be good for bringing teams together, but I think competition within teams, setting challenges for people is a far better way to get them to excel than pitting them against each other. That's just my view.
Oh, another transformational leadership behavior right there. Just being constructively challenging.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, okay, look, covered a lot of things there. Have we missed anything? Is there any last things you want to, or should we wrap it up there?
Well, I think we can wrap it up here. Things will probably come up during the next few weeks, and we can reconnect then and see what has come up. But yeah, it's funny when we choose these topics and you really don't know exactly what's going to come up, but it's always interesting.
Yeah, I kind of figured I might have a bit of a different take on it than you, because I look at it more on an individual coaching perspective, and I knew you were going to come at it from more of an organizational, but I thought there are just so many overlaps, and I think that's the main message that I wanted to leave with people on this topic was just if you look to contribute and you look to add value, if you go at it in a mindset of cooperation, then rather than I've got to achieve, I've got to get ahead, I think you'll be a far happier person, and you'll feel far more fulfilled in work, in your relationships, in your community. So that's the thing I encourage.
Let's take that with us for the rest of the day. So how can I contribute today? That's a good way.
I try to do that every day, but anyway, it's a habit I'm still working on. So everybody has their fears, and the ego comes up, and you what about me? But I try to think every day about how can I contribute? How can I add value to other people? So and I encourage that in others. It's very fulfilling. You'll feel better about your life if you do.
Yeah.
All right, good. Well, I feel good about the contribution we've made to each other, hopefully, exactly. And hopefully to our listeners. So so we'll wrap it up there. Tobi, thanks again for a good topic and another great conversation. I hope everyone's enjoyed it. If you have any criticisms, any comments, any feedback, any requests of topics you want us to cover, you can contact Tobi at his LinkedIn site, Tobias Dempker, and I'm at peterteuscher.com. You can email me there, and we look forward to your feedback. And until then, Tobi, have a great couple of weeks until we talk again. And everyone else, thanks for joining us, and take care of yourselves. Talk again soon.
See you around. Thanks.
Bye-bye.